Okay, so today I wanted to do a little demonstration, a demystification for those who need it. There's two instruments that some folks don't understand quite right, and I wanted to help try to make sense of it for them. And those two instruments are the VOR and the ILS. And these can easily trip you up. I mean, I know most people hop in the plane, turn on GPS, and just fly the GPS route, but sometimes that's either not an option, depending on the plane you're in, and it's also just good to know how these things work. So I wanted to try to demystify these things a little bit. They're not complicated. This is going to be fairly quick, but I'm going to use a simple little 172 here to do the demo. So let's go ahead and get this thing started up. This is not going to be a full tutorial, so we're going to shortcut the startup here just by doing the Control-E thing. Keep it as simple as possible and as focused as possible. And so it looks like it's all started up now. Let's wait for these guys to finish getting fired up. I'm also not going to bother with ATC at all. Again, this is purely about just showing how the instruments work. And I need the Garmins to tune those, so I'm kind of waiting on that. Okay, so let's go ahead and taxi out to the runway, which is pretty much in front of us here. I'm not going to worry about this guy either. Let's see, do I have that? Cute, I turned off that. Alright, so while the other Garmin is firing back up again, let's run over this guy. Excuse us. This is Orlando Executive. When I flew at the out of planes with the Civil Air Patrol, which is at the far end of that row of buildings. Those buildings weren't there when I flew. Okay. So, for the completely uninitiated, the VOR is for point-to-point navigation. There's ground transmitters that send out a signal that, if you want to think of it this way, it's like think of a bicycle wheel with the spokes. It's a classic example that's used to explain them. The transmitter is at the center. It's at the hub of that wheel, and each spoke is specifically encoded. So each spoke relates to a heading. And so there's a spoke for north, there's a spoke for 001, 002, 003, and so forth, all the way around the circle to 360, which is, again, north. And the VOR will tell you which of those spokes you're on specifically. And it does that it's usually intuitive, but not always. The ILS, on the other hand, is a different kind of radio system. It only has one spoke, and that one spoke is aimed straight down the center line of the runway, and then it has a second. If you take that same system and you turn it on its side, it has a second spoke that points up into the sky at an angle, and that's the glide slope. And that angle is there to keep you, if you stay on the center line and you stay on the glide slope, you should not run into anything that's attached to the ground. And that's usually a good thing. But the ILS, you'll see the difference here in a minute, but when you look at the instruments in the cockpit, these two instruments on the right side here, they look the same, but that's because they're actually a combination. In this case, they're a combination of three things, but even without the GPS, they're a combination of at least two things. They're a combination of a VOR and an ILS. they're two very different kinds of instruments, but they've got this unified common layout, and so they work well when combined into one display unit, but they work rather differently, and I'm going to show you how where the differences are. Alright, so first thing I want to do is tune in. I'm going to tune the top one into the ILS frequency, which is 109.9. Put you up top. And then the VOR is 112.2. Okay, we also need to change the CDI. The CDI is the course deviation indicator, which are the moving needles. And so both of them are set to the VLOC now, which is the radio. And let's go ahead and get in the kind of default position here. Let's go ahead and get off the ground. There we go. I turned off the other airplane, so we shouldn't see any airplanes. And most of this flight we're going to be looking at just the instruments. The other thing I wanted to do was set an altitude of 2,000. And our heading is going to be initially the runway heading, so we'll get that set here. Okay. Let's go ahead and get away from the ground, and then we'll start on the little demo here that I've cooked up. I'm going to try to keep this as short and sweet as possible. Let's go and pick the flaps up. Turn on the autopilot. Heading hold. Set it to 500 feet a minute. Okay. So while the autopilot's taking us up to altitude, I'm going to switch us over to my instrument view. Let's see this. Get this squared up. Okay. So on the right side of the screen, you should see the ILS up top. Or well, at the top, or at the very top, you'll have the horizon. You'll have the heading indicator, and then you'll have the ILS, the instrument I've got tuned into ILS, and then below that will be the VOR. So let's go ahead and we're just going to follow this out. Let's turn due east actually to start this. So the VOR has a movable dial. Both these instruments both have a movable dial. Okay, you can twist both of them. When it's being used as a VOR, turning that dial tells the instrument which of the radials, those bicycle spokes, you want to be on. And so I've tuned it into 090 here, east, and this shows that the course is to the right. I know that because we're heading east, and I've selected east. Those two headings are in the same direction. When they're opposite, you respond to the instrument differently. But in this configuration, when the headings match, the center, the circle in the center, represents the airplane, and the movable needle is the course line. That's the radial, the thing painted on the ground. So this tells me that the course is to my right. So I need to turn to the south. So I'm going to turn from 090 to 135, and that should fairly quickly take us towards that radial. then when we cross it, I'm going to double back and go back towards the airport. So here comes the radial. We're going to cross that radial. And I don't want to get too far from the airport. I want to keep us on the map that I've got displayed here. Almost there. We'll discuss the to and the from indicator here in just a minute. Okay, so we're about to cross that line. And if I wanted to actually follow that radial to the east, at this point I would turn east and follow that line. And the only correction I have to make is for wind. So we've crossed the line. So now we're south of the east-west radial. I'm going to turn us around. I'm going to turn us to the right. So that was 135, so I want 315 for the reciprocal. And this time I am going to intercept that radial. I'm going to take that back across the airport, across that VOR tower. But now, because I'm on a westerly heading, but I've selected the easterly and easterly radial, I'm not the center of that instrument anymore. The airplane is now represented by the line. The radial is represented by the center. If the heading is not somewhat aligned with the radial that you've picked, you switch roles. The needle, you become the needle, the course is in the center. So here we come. I'm going to turn to the left in just a moment to pick up that radial. Okay, so dial in west. And now, other than adjusting for wind, which I don't know which way the wind is blowing yet, looks like it's out of the north. So we're the line because west and east don't match. So I need to steer more to the right to get us, the line, over the center. Okay. So I'm going to follow this back over the airport. Looks like 280 is going to be a good heading for us, or close to it, maybe 278. So about the to from flag. The to and the from tell you, okay, so we've selected east. We've selected the 090 radial. It says from. That means that we are over that side of that half of the signal. Where we want east, it says from. We've got it centered up. We're on that radial. And the way it's usually said is we're on the from. So the instrument tells you two things. It tells you can see which radial is selected by just looking at the dial, and it tells you whether you're on that or whether you're heading towards that. If it said to, if we had this set up the same way, if we have east selected, come on, a little more to the north. If we had east selected and it said to, that would mean we're on the other side of the VOR. We would actually be on the, in this case, would be on the west radial. We'd be on 270 radial. So also, by the way, the closer you get to a VOR, the more sensitive that needle gets. it gets to a point where you're just not going to keep it in the center. So at this point, I'm just going to let it go off. I know I'm close to the VOR. It's lost the signal because we're directly above it. Now we're on the 2 side. Now we're on that westerly radial. We're on that 270 radial. So if I want to go to the VOR, in a sense, I would have to turn to the east. Okay. Now, even though the to and the from flag have switched, we still have the same problem of the center line of the instrument is still the radial. It's still that east-west radial. We are still the needle because our headings don't match. So to get back on that radial, I've got to turn to the left a little bit. And we'll see that needle come back towards the center. Let's go. Let's try 275. See if that'll keep us centered up. And that's really it. It takes a little while for it to become second nature. But it's a good skill to keep fresh, because sometimes VORs are necessary on instrument approaches. When you go missed approach, a lot of times you're going to have to follow a VOR or identify a checkpoint that you've got to hit by VORs, or sometimes even multiple VORs where they intersect. So what I'm talking about here is, I'm not going to go into all the ways that you can use VORs in navigation. This is just about translating what you're seeing on the screen into positional information. We've got east tuned. It says 2, so we're actually on the west radial. We've got 090 picked. It says 2. We're on the reciprocal. We're on the 270. All right, so we're west of the airport. Turn us north a bit here. 315. And I do want to demonstrate one other thing real quick, and then we'll move over to the ILS. Okay, so 315. 135. So now, because I'm going to be taking up an easterly heading, and we're heading to the east-west radial, we've got east dialed in, we are going to again be the center of the instrument, and the needle is going to represent the line that you draw on the ground that represents radials. And so we'll see that needle start to slide over here fairly shortly, if all goes well. One other thing to note in the display here, you see the little orange flag with the up-down arrow in it? That's an indicator that the needle that it is next to, or perpendicular to in this case, so it's next to the glide slope, that means it's not getting a signal for that needle. Alright, so let's shallow our approach. Let's say 120. So at this point, like I said, we're on an easterly heading. We've got east radial selected. That means we're the center of the instrument, and the needle is the line that we're heading towards. So let's turn east. Actually, I think I need to be about 08. Let's try that. Because I think the wind is still coming out of the north. Yeah. Let's just tune 090 and see what that gets us. Okay, so as you get closer, like I said, that needle gets really, really sensitive. And so you have to keep in mind how far you are from that radial. This plane does not have DME equipment in it, which is unfortunate. So you do have to pay attention a little bit closer. But it's just a matter of keeping in mind where you are, where you're located, and where you are located in reference to that, to the radio navigation sources that you're using. So we're about to pass over the transmitter. We just did, so it switched from to to from. We are now on the 090 radial, or close to it, so it's going to say from. We're on the from, and that's what that means. And so as we get further from the VOR station, that needle will move back in towards the center. Pretty much anywhere within a mile of that transmitter, and it's somewhat ambiguous. Okay. So again, easterly heading, we've got east selected, so we are the center of the dial, and so if I want to go towards that line, towards that needle, I need to steer to the right. Okay, so I'm going to let it get out here another minute or so, and then we'll turn around. I've got one other thing to demo, and then we'll do the ILS, which is going to be easy because we need to fly back over the airport anyway to get to the ILS end. Alright, let's go ahead and turn around. And so, as before, we're going to be taking up a westerly heading, but I've still got the east selected on the OBS for the VOR, and that means that we're going to become the needle, and the center of the instrument is the course. And where that matters is just keeping in mind what you need to do, what you need to, what was it called? Oh yeah, 250. So where that comes in, where that matters is knowing which way to turn, or which, are you south or are you north of the line? Are you east or are you west of the line? It's just about understanding that the instrument is telling you, you need to, if you want to be on this line, you need to turn right or left. So here we're on about we're coming up on a 45-degree intercept onto that line. It won't take long to get down to it. Here it comes. So again, notice that to from flag didn't change. We're still on the from. We're still on that 090 radial. I always turn a little too late. I need to work on that. Okay, so 0, we're going due west. Looks like we're being pushed north, so let's turn more to the south. see, I just did it to myself. We're the needle, so I need to go the other way. It's really easy to get this backwards. So yeah, when the compass and the OBS don't match, you're the needle. So here we are, we're the needle, we're flying back to the desired radial. Okay, so this will take us over the airport. And we're getting within that mile zone of confusion. Another few seconds, we'll be passing over the VOR itself. We should see it flip. There it goes. So we just flew over the VOR. We're now on the 2 side, which means the opposite side from what we've dialed into the OBS. Okay, so I'm going to keep flying out this direction, and we'll get set up for the ILS approach. Not officially. I'm just going to get in line with it so that you can see something I wanted to demonstrate. But what I wanted to point out here is, as I said before, you tell the instrument which radial you want to be on, or which radial you want to track towards. So if I change the VOR OBS, the bottom one, as I tune that dial, it will tell me which radial, you know, when it centers up like that, that means that I'm over that radial. So this is the 086 radial, and it says 2, so I'm actually over the opposite of that, the 266 radial. But this twisting of the dial changes where that needle falls. And that doesn't happen with the ILS. Watch the ILS needle up above. I can twist this thing all the way around. I'm not going to, but I can twist this thing all the way around, and that needle's not going to budge. And that's because the ILS is not sending out a radial. It's just sending out a center line. And that instrument is only going to display your relationship to the center line. Okay, so that was all the way around, needle did not move. I'm going to go ahead, now just as my own personal habit, I like to set the ILS, the OBS and ILS on the heading of the runway, the heading that I'm going to need to follow for the ILS. It's not there to make the ILS work. It's there just as a reminder to me of what my heading should be. It's just a little helpful aid. So as we're flying along, the glide slope is coming up, and we're in the case of this particular approach, it starts at 2,000 feet, which is why I picked 2,000 feet to be flying around at. But we're going to fly through this, get the glide slope above us, so that when I turn around, we come in and we watch that glide slope come down, just because it's fun. But right now we are going due east, and that puts us above the, well, pretty much due east. So, or sorry, we're flying due west from the airport, and the ILS is actually to our south. It's on a heading of 070, or 073 rather. So we're below the glide slope now. I am going to turn us to the south. To take us towards the center line of the runway. While I'm doing that, I'm gonna, oops. I'm gonna change the VOR OBS to 073, or actually, let's do, yeah. Okay, so we should start seeing that ILS needle move. I don't want to fly through it like I usually do, so I'm going to shallow up our intercept angle. Now the VOR is not lined up with the runway, it's off to the, from this perspective, it's off to the right. Alright. Let's get our heading fix. Still gonna overshoot it just a little bit. That's okay. So at this point, I'm not interested in what the VOR tells me. Now it's all about the ILS. So on the ILS, we are the center, and the ILS, the center line of the runway, is the needle. Let's go ahead and set the runway heading here and see what that does for us in terms of wind. And here comes the glide slope. I'm just going to go ahead and hit the approach mode on the autopilot and let it handle the rest of it. But basically what this means is that the center line of the runway is just a hair off to our left, and we'll get centered up on it little by little here. And we're on the glide slope. Our heading does match the OBS, or at least it matches what the ILS wants us on. So once again, just to show it, no matter what I do with this OBS dial, it does not change what that needle does. When it's in ILS mode, the OBS dial does not matter. I can turn it all the way around, and it won't even switch from to to from. It's irrelevant. Like I said, I just use it for my own personal kind of a reminder. Let's go ahead and pull the throttle back. And so that pretty much concludes the demo. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. And there's our runway right out in front of us. And so I'm going to go ahead and land this thing, and that'll be the end of it. This is the premium airport, though, for Orlando Executive. And you see that lake over on the right? The road's not supposed to be underwater. Go ahead and get the flaps out. Turn off the autopilot. Down we come. And that is that. Welcome to Orlando. I hope this helped. Like I said, any questions, feel free to post them into the comments. I'll see if I can get them answered. All right. Thanks for watching.